Thank you so much, and I'm blushing a little bit. I really appreciate it. So I'm coming to you from space this morning because there's no COVID in space. but no, just thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you guys again, and for all of you to take the time to show up while you're managing your inboxes. A quick disclaimer before I start spewing: I am not a data scientist. I'm not a technologist. I'm a thinker and I'm a strategist who has enough familiarity with these fields and some others to draw meaningful correlations between them. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, without slides, because I think we've all had enough of slides at this point in the pandemic, is based on the excerpt of a book that I'm writing with Nicole Kakal, the CEO of Forbes Ignite, which is Forbes' innovation coalition, on customer-centric AI. So it combines the disciplines of artificial intelligence, business strategy, human-centered design, and many, many other fields to provide a guide and an actual canvas to use AI in ways that improve the customer experience. Now, the portion I'm going to unveil to you today uses the lens of economics to take a hatchet to one of the most frequently cited analogies for why data is valuable. But the most interesting part of that, and the truth about why data is expensive, and some data is more expensive than others, can be seen most clearly from where that analogy breaks down. Now, in grasping this, we may be able to think in a much more systematic way about many aspects of our work. Now, most of these talks are about work that's been done and dusted and tied up with a bow, but this is a peek to a work in progress. So as such, some of the things I say today may be wrong. And if they are, I know everyone here is going to be the best qualified people to tell me so. So let's dig in. So I'm going to start with this quote from Martin Casado and Peter Lawton, who are partners at Andreessen Horowitz. They say, treating data as a magical moat can misdirect founders from focusing on what is really needed to win. Now, unless you've been living in a socially distanced bomb shelter, you've probably heard the analogy that data is the new oil. Now, and given that oil is the most valuable commodity of the physical economy, it makes sense at first glance to say that data is the new oil of the digital economy. Yet, this analogy quickly breaks down, and it's at the point where it snaps, as I said before, that we learn the most about the true strategic value of data and how to plot our own data strategy. So oil is what economists call a rival good. A rival good is something that only one person can own at a time, and which, if it's used, can't be used again. So if I hold an apple in my hand and eat it, then by definition, you can't come along and eat that same apple too. And in the same way, only one person can own a certain barrel of oil at a time. And once that oil is burned, poof, it's gone. Now, data in the digital economy could be considered a non-rival good because both you and I can have a copy of the same data. We can look at the same email at the same time. If I delete it, you can resend it to me. Now, if I want to share data in like a Google Doc with you or with 1,000 of you, I just click the share button and everybody has it at the same time. I can analyze that data until the end of time. And unless I permanently delete it, smash my computer, or sabotage the data center it's stored in, it can never be used up in the traditional sense. So why is data a valuable strategic asset if it's an inexhaustible resource like air that everyone can have equal access to? Well, most would say in practice, that's because not everyone can have equal access to the data. So if I went and knocked on Mark Zuckerberg's door and asked him politely for all of Facebook's data, I don't think he would click the share button. He would probably unfriend me. Now, if I wanted to get at Facebook's data anyway, I'd either have to hack his system, difficult and illegal, please don't try it, or hire an army of mercenaries to take over his data center, even more difficult and illegal. Now, because it's so difficult for me to get to his data, he's able to use it in ways that create value for his company, but not necessarily always for others. So he's created what most of the talking heads in the field would call a data moat. Now, the moat idea comes from Warren Buffett, who said, in business, I look for economic castles protected by unbreachable moats. Now, his conception of a moat around an economic castle consisted of things like big vertically integrated supply chains, proprietary software or processes, and many other factors, like maybe having a huge head start in a certain line of business. But data moats, They're a different animal altogether. Now, many investors, founders, and analysts think that having a data moat comes down to possessing a proprietary, properly formatted, labeled input-output data set that no one else has and cannot easily replicate. And they assume that this alone will lead to powerful competitive advantage. And the last time I addressed this conference, I even said the exact same thing. I was wrong. I'll tell you why. Having this kind of data is only a small percentage of what it takes to build a true data moat, one that meets all the economic conditions that Buffett would be looking for in a traditional business. So I started this talk with a quote from Casado and Lawton, making a similar observation that data alone is never enough to constitute what most of us would consider a defensible moat. But sustainable defensibility, in their view, is more likely the result of factors, they say, such as domain knowledge, differentiated technology, go-to-market speed, and winning the talent wars. Well, that's also true, but this is also not the source of the economic value of a true data moat. These are just a handful of tools that you need to build one without a blueprint of what the thing looks like. So how do we build a true data moat? So for that answer, we have to drill back into the oil metaphor with all its features and flaws and the story of how a titan of yesteryear and the tech leaders of today made their fortunes. So in 1863, John D. Rockefeller entered the oil business. Now, human beings have known about oil for thousands of years. The Mesopotamians used bitumen to hold together their ziggurat pyramids. The Romans, they saw it bubbling up in Scotland and used it for lubricant and other things. Now, at the time Rockefeller got his start, oil was mostly used to fuel kerosene lamps. But something important happened between ancient times and Rockefeller's day that made kerosene possible: oil refining. Now, humans had learned a chemical process to extract more and more energy from the same physical amount of oil. In 1863, kerosene was as far as we'd gotten in that refining technology, and the fuel was certainly overtaking other alternatives for lighting, like whale oil, which smelled pretty bad and didn't burn very cleanly. Kerosene was not so rosy smelling either and produced some black smoke, but it was a long sight better than what came before. So you'd be able to say, at the time Rockefeller started out, that oil or kerosene lit the world. But Rockefeller knew that one day oil would run the world. He understood that technology gets better and cheaper over time, and that the process and results of oil refining would also. So while everyone else was valuing oil as something to be used for lighting homes and lubricating machinery, he snapped up as much of the oil supply as he could and built out refining capacity, while the fuel and the land under which it sat was cheap compared to what he thought they'd eventually cost. Now, as a result of his foresight, by the early 1880s, his company controlled 90% of the US refineries and pipelines. But Rockefeller had a vision, despite his controversial business practices, which you may be aware of, that the true value of oil was in its refinement and distribution. Unrefined oil sitting in the ground had very little value, but its value increased remarkably as it flowed through the supply chain to the point of purchase. Now, by controlling refinery operations and distribution channels, Rockefeller effectively controlled the immensely profitable US oil industry. Now, fast forward to today. Whether they realized it in these exact terms or not, the founders of today's tech titans had the same fundamental observation about the value of data. Like oil, data has always been with us. The first data was an inventory of cattle inscribed on a clay tablet in Iraq thousands of years ago. Data has been around for all of civilization, but technology presented an opportunity for us to get more value out of every bit and byte through more and more powerful and increasingly cheaper tools to analyze it, the same way oil refining worked. Now, the information revolution also enabled us to transfer data literally at the speed of light and for next to no cost. So the value wasn't locked away in inaccessible file cabinets full of paper. So Rockefeller used the railroads to make it faster and cheaper, to use oil beyond its point of origin, thus increasing its value as a commodity. Now, our modern day barons used a vast network of fiber optic cables and all of the advanced information technology that accompanied it. Yet, the tech pioneers were able to do better than Rockefeller in two ways. First, while Rockefeller merely supplied the oil and extracted huge rents from the economy it powered, a massive amount of economic value was created by the people who used that oil to power factories, to light homes, and do everything else that gave us modern civilization. Today's data masters also created the products and services with that data. Think about it as if Rockefeller had also owned all the all the factories and electric companies. Now, second and most important, the reason we can send data nearly instantaneously and cost-free is because it's a non-rival good. You'll remember that. If it was a rival good, like paper or clay tablets that used to contain data, or Rockefeller's oil, it would be difficult to replicate it and very costly to transfer it. So the underlying reason data used to be very expensive is because even though by its nature, it's a non-rival good, it was inextricably linked to a rival good like paper and ink. Think of it like multiplying any number by zero. No matter how large the number, multiplying it by zero gives you zero. And when you fuse any non-rival good with a rival one, it becomes rival again. Now, technology broke the bond between physical writing surfaces and data, unleashing that non-rivalry. But it also created new ways of fusing rival and non-rival goods together that allowed for that rivalry to be restored again. And this time, instead of it being a binary yes or no, rivalry is now on a spectrum that can be increased or decreased based on certain actions. Now, this process of transforming data from a non-rival good to a rival good is the precise reason that some data is more expensive or valuable than others today. Instead of it being pricey, though, because it's stuck on paper, it can be made expensive partly because of a company having it locked away in their digital file cabinets, like Zuckerberg. It's kind of like turning a cubic square foot of air into a barrel of oil. Now, Rockefeller only dreamed he could create oil out of thin air. Today's companies, they do it every day and then use machine learning to refine that to jet fuel. And they also operate the metaphorical planes and airlines. But here's where we move way beyond the common understanding of a data moat and why I took up so much time explaining this important concept. Making data proprietary is far from the only way to transform it into a rival good. There are certain processes of data collection, transmission, analysis, and even sharing that can transform it into a rival good and create massive value. The more rival it becomes through these processes, the more valuable it is. Now, knowing this key fact will enable you to look at your data strategy in a more scientific way than your competitors and enable you to more systematically and reliably add value at every step of the process. So how do we do this? So first of all, since data doesn't naturally come labeled, kind of like oil doesn't come refined, this is one of the ways that you can increase the rivalness of your data. Data also needs to be clean. No duh, right? That is laid out in neat rows that are consistent and not jumbled up. And both of these things take a huge amount of data scientists' time, and because they're important to producing that rivalry. Now, it's also important to make sure that the data is laid out in such a way where you can get at the thing or the target that you're most interested in with the minimum amount of effort. And this is no simple task. It requires a massive amount of real world context, data science skills, and is a huge source of rivalry. And all of this is a massive amount of work. And if two organizations have the exact same data, but one can do all this work and the other one cannot, then one can do AI and the other can't, full stop. Now that's value and the reason why data scientists make so much money. Think of this stage as sort of turning your crude oil into kerosene. So if you don't have the data in any state of sanitation, let's look at the ways that data gathering can actually increase rivalry. So public data, for instance, is widely available on the internet, and it seems to get increasing every day. It's free and you can aggregate large amounts of it, but you would imagine there's little competitive advantage because everybody has access. It's a non-rival good. Now, let's imagine that you were able to scrape every local school or event calendar in the country and link it to a data set that you already have about the kinds of events that a large number of people have attended in the past. Now you're able to provide a more valuable service to local event organizers by helping them recruit the best attendees, and to attendees by helping them better find events. But you've also turned air into oil by combining this free data set with your rival proprietary one in a way that makes the proprietary one more rival. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip past some of the other ways of creating rivalry because there's some similarities. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about a really unintuitive way to create rivalry. You can certainly do it through data sharing, but can you create more rival data by giving it away for free? Let's have a thought experiment in the closing minutes of this discussion. So much about tech and innovation relies on the adoption of standards, either formal or practical, because like Windows, everybody uses it because everybody uses it. That way, everybody's working on the same playbook. Now, Elon Musk hoped that giving away his IP for Tesla's batteries would be more than just a PR stunt. He thought that if everybody adopted the same architecture, it would be cheaper for him to make these things as people competed against each other to make them and drove the costs down. It didn't work out that way. But there's a glaring opportunity, and again, this is a thought experiment, for one of today's data giants to become even more gigantic by giving their data away. So there have been some calls by researchers, especially in the BIPOC community, for Facebook to make its anonymized data available in a public data trust. So in theory, if Facebook were to completely transfer all its data without anonymization to a trust, not just for research, but for businesses and governments everywhere, it would become an indispensable building block in nearly every organization's technology stack. This, in turn, would strongly incentivize all these organizations to engage with their stakeholders within the Facebook ecosystem rather than on the open web because of the massively increased insights they could attain and recycle to create more valuable products and services. Now, all these organizations engaging there would make it essential for people, whether they wanted to or not, to reactivate their accounts. But because the data would be held by a trusted third party, users are more likely to refriend Zuck willingly. Now, the proliferation of engagement with Facebook data would create an avalanche of data and presumably give the data trust's insights into the data of other parties using that system to enrich its own data sets, which it could then share back with the organizations. Now, if Facebook paid the trust a fee per impression for targeting of ads, the way many publishers do with third-party targeting services, it would massively increase Facebook's prediction power, the effectiveness of its ads, the audience numbers and engagement of Facebook, and the new types of products and services it create, all while funding the trust and ridding Facebook of most data security costs. It would also give the social network a social justice-friendly face as well. Now, as I said at the beginning, and I've cut through a few of these things in service of time, because data transmission is also one key way that you can shoot me an email and we can talk about. At the beginning, I said this basic concept that fusing a rival good and a non-rival good together makes the whole combination rival, and that technology has made it possible to have varying degrees of rivalry, a spectrum versus a yes or a no. It's a still fairly new idea. There are holes. Brighter minds than mine can certainly find ways to be more systematic and mathematical with quantifying both the relative rivalry of the data sets and the mechanisms through which rivalry is increased or decreased. Some of you, though, might think I'm completely full of crap. Now, especially if you think that, I want to hear from you. Feel free to drop me a note at wthompson@forbes.com. That's wthompson@forbes.com. And I look forward to chatting with you. Thank you so much.